Thank you so much for this. I'm really excited, guys.
Yeah, only you, Miro, could get me to.
All right, we're live, guys. Thank you so much for coming today. I am Cherry. I am the beer buyer from Blackhearts and Sparrows, and I'm here with Garrett Oliver, who probably needs no introduction, but I will get you to introduce yourself. And also with Miro, who is the brand ambassador for Brooklyn Brewing here in Australia. Thanks so much for being here today.
It's great to be here.
Really
it is, of course, not today for me, but tonight.
Of course, so yeah.
It is 11 p.m. on Friday night.
Okay.
And I will say that only you and Miro could get me to do 11 o'clock on Friday night.
I really appreciate it.
This is how much I love Australia.
I was sort of thinking, because it's 1 o'clock here, it's a bit early to start with a beer so hefty as this. But in saying that, Melbourne is freezing cold today, so it's kind of the perfect day to open this beer. So it's worked very well.
Well, I'm going to be a little bit here and there because it was not a terribly warm day today, but in the 30s, warm enough for us. And so, yeah, we're just coming to the end of our summer. I went to the beach yesterday. It was beautiful.
So good.
Anybody who follows me on Instagram may have seen that in stories.
Yep, sure did. Well, speaking of going to the beach, it's probably a great segue for our first beer.
Awesome. Well, I am standing by over here.
Excellent.
All right.
Let's crack into it.
So,
tell me about this beer.
Well, Bel Air was a beer that was kind of a long time coming, a long time in gestation. When we started to see about 5-6 years ago, we started to see some hot side soured beers happening, rather cold side sour beers happening that are often referred to as Kettle Sours.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the early ones were not very good.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been a lover of Lambic, but there were some people at the time who really looked down upon this particular type of beer, not apparently knowing that this was a standard way of making a lot of Berliner Weiss,
Mm-hmm.
over 100 years ago.
Yeah.
So what is known now as kettle souring was a normal part of the process for any number of different types of beer, and there were long souring fermentations and short souring fermentations. I think the thing that we want to kind of go back to and pay attention to is that sour beers are kind of part of the resurgence of the lost world of food. And what I mean by that is that, at least in the United States, we lost all of our sourdough bread and our stinky cheeses and all kinds of other stuff, in the middle of the last century.
Well,
so as everything starts to come back and everybody wants the funk back in their life,
Mm-hmm.
what was driven out of beer was not only funk, but acidity. Now, when you look at alcoholic drinks, by and large, there are some exceptions, like sake is a bit of an exception, but by and large, they are based either upon some type of bitterness or some type of acidity.
Yeah.
There's going to be the backbone. If you look at cocktails really are either bitter cocktails or they're sour cocktails. You don't add sours and lemon juice, generally speaking. It's one or the other. In the case of wine, white wines are largely based around acidity, red wines more based around tannin. The beer world used to be similarly bifurcated. So you had the bitter beer world and the sour beer world. And what happened to us is when we went into like the Matrix in the middle of the 1900s, we kind of lopped off all the funk off of all kinds of food, and we got rid of the acidic side of beer.
Yeah.
And only a few places in the world, like Belgium, kept bits and pieces, of this, the most ancient parts. So this technique basically went away and is now having a resurgence. Like I said, when it first came out, people were like, wow, they're really simple. And I'm like, is that bad? Because a really good sour beer could be a great thing to drink like 6 of, on a Saturday afternoon barbecue.
100%.
If it was, but I don't want to drink Hansen's Goose like that. Like that's a special occasion beer It's, you got to slow down, pay attention, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, there are some beers that are kind of like, great jazz or something that you want to put headphones on. And there are some things that you just blare in the background, on your speakers.
Mm-hmm.
This Bel Air is designed as a blare in the background on your speakers kind of beer.
I love that explanation.
You do not have to put your headphones on to listen to Bel Air. Bel Air will speak perfectly clear. You can pay attention to it if you want. There's plenty there if you want to pay attention. If you just feel like drinking it, that's 100% fine. And I think that we wanted to get rid of the idea, which is a relatively new idea, that sour beer was somehow expensive and special. However, it is difficult. So the way that Bel Air is made is we start with our own lactobacillus. We don't buy it from anywhere. It was actually cultured in our own lab.
Okay.
We actually have dedicated facilities to doing the hot side conversion. Okay. So people often call this a kettle sour, but in our case, it's actually not done in a kettle. And basically, for those who are interested, you're taking the wort, you are souring the wort over the course of 36 to 48 hours. In our case, we hold it very precise temperatures so we can hit our acidity precisely. Mm-hmm. And then we go through to the kettle and go through a normal boil and a normal fermentation. After that fermentation, the beer is dry hopped. And so this is fermented with the same yeast that most of our beers are fermented with. Most of our top fermented beers are ales, which is widely known as Chico or California ale, et cetera, et cetera. Very straightforward yeast. It's the lactobacillus, the souring bacteria, that's creating all this tropical aromatic. Mm-hmm. So we're getting all that kind of pineapple fruit, and the mango and peaches and all that other good stuff. That is the lactobacillus, and it's being helped out then by the dry hopping that kind of just rounds that all out and gives you some floral characteristics as well. Now, the thing that I love about watching people drink Bel Air is that people who are not really that used to sour beer, the first reaction is the wince. Mm-hmm. They drink it and they go, like that, and they're like, wow, okay. And they take a step back and then they take another sip and you kind of watch them. They start up here and they're like, whoa. And then about halfway down the glass, they're kind of like, And then about here, they're like, hey.
They won over.
Yeah. And then people who didn't think they liked sour beer and totally they didn't like sour beer, I love watching them order the second Bel Air because they look confused. They look confused. It's like, I'm ordering another sour beer, and I started off the conversation by saying how much I hated them. And is anybody watching me because I'm having another sour beer? And it's like, once I start drinking Bel Air, that's pretty much probably what I'm going to drink for the rest of the evening.
Okay. Yeah, nice. I love sour beer in that I think it's such an interesting way to introduce wine drinkers to beer.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's a way that I've often used it, or vice versa. My partner, when I met him, didn't drink a lot of wine at all, but he was like a big beer nerd, and I wanted to get him into wine, so I showed him some minimal intervention wine, and he was like, oh, this reminds me of sours, and more kind of mixed ferment sours, but it's just like there's so much crossover and there's so much like interest between the two worlds, which I think is really nice, and that's the thing that I love about sour beer.
Well, I think in food and drink, really, there's only one story going on within the general wider Western world, if you like, of food. And that is a recovery from an industrialized food system. Mm-hmm. And, the same things that drive us to now be more interested than we were in, great old funky cheeses, and really kind of low intervention coffees and natural wine and Kimoto and Yamahai style sakes. Yeah. It's all one thing. It's all the same conversation. Natural sets of yeast, lower intervention, and the allowing of microflora to really do their thing. Mm-hmm. The interest in things like the Noma Guide to Fermentation is amazing. This is a very expensive book by the top restaurant in the world. And at least in the United States, it sold, easily more than 100,000 copies, and really very quickly. You never would have sold a book like that about how to make fermented foods at home, even 10 years ago.
No,
I'm fermenting hot sauce tomorrow. I grow habanero peppers at home, and I'm making mango habanero fermented hot sauce.
Delicious.
This is kind of part of craft beer. A lot of craft beer is remembering things that we used to know, but we've forgotten.
Yeah.
And sour beer is just kind of part of that.
100%. 100%. Now that you are talking about food, what would you pair with this?
Oh man, this is so great with, especially, there are a lot of things it works with, but particularly seafood. Anything that you would put a squeeze of lime on, squeeze of lemon rather on, whether it's shrimp, lobster, salmon, anything like that. If you would put a squeeze of lemon on it, Bel Air is going to work great. Yeah. And that includes things like a pork chop that you might not think of, but lemon is great on pork. Ask Italians. That's going to be a great combination as well. It's not necessarily going to be the first thing that I'm going to reach for with a steak, but if you season the steak well, it totally works.
Makes sense.
And so there's a really wide range of stuff that it works with. It's great with barbecue. If you think about the American style of barbecue, right? Okay, what do you have usually? Fruit and a lot of acid.
Yeah.
Right? It's made, there are different types of barbecue in the United States, but we have a vinegar-based barbecue, we have tomato-based barbecue sauces, etc. But almost all of them, except for just the straight up Texan, salt and pepper style, they all will have a certain level of acidity to them because the acidity kind of helps balance out the fat. Well, you have that nice slice of acid, through it, works great. Also, cheeses where you have a natural acidity in the cheese. Goat cheeses come, most quickly to mind. Anything, where you think about goat cheeses, they're tangy, at least until they're really well aged.
Yeah.
Fresh goat cheese has a tang to it. That tang works so great here. Salads. Often you run into trouble, right? You're doing a beer dinner and, chef wants to start with a salad. He's putting a vinaigrette on it. You're like, oh no. So from a culinary point of view, and obviously, beer and food is a subject I care about a lot.
I have heard.
Sour beers open up a whole new possibilities. And as Miro helped us demonstrate in Australia, it also opens up so many possibilities when it comes to making cocktails, because not that you couldn't make beer cocktails before, but frankly, they were generally kind of ersatz. They were like, yeah, you can use the beer, but you'd rather have wine, and you're just kind of trying to make it into a beer cocktail.
Yeah, sure.
When you're using a sour beer like Bel Air, it's obvious. Like, this is exactly what you want. All you need to do is take a little bit of simple syrup, sugar syrup, rum, and Bel Air, and you're good to go.
That sounds great.
It's actually really good.
What about something sweeter, dessert-wise? What would you think of to pair with this? Sorry, I hope I'm not throwing you too much of a curveball, but
no, I haven't had that many desserts with it, but I'll tell you what, it makes a great dessert. You can make Bel Air into a beautiful granita or sorbet.
Oh, that sounds lovely.
Or basically turn it into like an iced slushy type of drink, like a frozen daiquiri sort of thing. And it's absolutely fantastic. And then there are other things that'll be more obvious. For example, cheesecake. You can imagine you often put like a fruit compote or something on the cheesecake, and that's kind of acting as kind of the acidic action there. You can do the same thing with Bel Air, and you just kind of go slicing through that cheesecake and have all that tropical stuff going on. It's great, so there's a lot of things, even in the dessert world. I mean, if you're pairing up with beer, yes, you can do imperial stout with like a lemon meringue pie, but Bel Air is going to be great. It's going to step in there with that tangy, lemony sort of thing and do the whole dance. So I would definitely say that there's a lot of possibilities, especially when you see some desserts that are lower in sugar, and maybe and really might depend a little bit more on savory elements and salt.
Yeah.
I tend to like, people who know like salt on their chocolate. Not so much sugar, a little bit of salt, a little bit of salt on good salt on the ice cream, it's all good stuff.
For sure. Hey, Mira, do we have any questions coming through?
I think people are getting very excited around the food items. I think the discussion around meringue cheesecake.
I already ate.
Yeah, I'm just looking for ideas of what to cook for dinner.
Yeah. I think that there was one question around, I suppose, selling beer, and one thing you've equipped me really well with in talking about your beers, Garrett, is sort of looking at two worlds of sour, like the timber sour or wood contact sort of stuff, and then stainless. I've never really used that word kettle out in the trade. I'd sort of break them into the two sort of vessels, and sort of just the idea of I think it must be someone who's selling. Actually, it is definitely someone who's out there selling beer, asking about how do you talk about selling barrel aged sours, which I don't know. I think you kind of covered that a little bit already with it. It's their very special occasion. They sort of dwell in the cellar, and I think this guy's every day, right?
Yeah, this is an everyday beer, and I kind of think if you think about red wine goes from Plonk to Barolo, and it's all in the details, right? I mean, they're both red wines. The same vineyards will make Nebbiolo d'Alba, which will sell here for like $18 a bottle, and they will also have their Barolo, which is going to be $100 a bottle. Now, if you know your wine well enough, you'll know which vineyards make their Nebbiolo d'Alba at least 80% as good as their Barolo. And you'll buy that for like $18 instead of spending all that. And then you save the Barolo for the really special occasions. And you kind of get what they call baby Barolo, which is it's really very good. It's not worth $150, but you can see where those bones come from. Yeah. And the same thing, is going on here. There's a whole other layer of funk and different types of acidity that you're going to find in a Great Lambic that are going to give it that vibrancy. That also, however, means that type of beer tends to be more specialized, and you really want to pay attention to it. You're not, who really wants to drink some of the world's great goozes, with barbecue in the backyard while having a chat and paying no attention really to the beer at all? It seems like a bit of a waste to do that. Whereas in this case, this is a highly controlled process. We spent years working on our souring technique because everybody who's here has had some terrible sour beers. I mean, come on. We have. Just absolutely strip the enamel off your teeth, or vinegary, or some kind of weird milky sour milk funk, or whatever else. Now they're getting better. Certainly these days it's nothing like it was 4 or 5 years ago, where they were truly, mostly awful. People are obviously getting better at their chops, but we didn't want to release anything until we were like, I want this to meet, what I call the 4-pint principle, which is, what I mean by that is that when you have any of our regular beers, and Black Ops does not fit into this category, but you could, I want you to want 4 pints. That doesn't mean that you're going to have 4 pints or that you even should have 4 pints. It means that you should say to yourself, I could have 4 pints. If I had the time, that would be a nice thing to do. If you get to the bottom of the beer and you don't want another one, that's not a great sign. It's like, I'll have a margarita. It's like, if you really liked it and you have the time and you're chilling, why do you not want another one? And usually it's because it didn't taste that good.
Never an issue I've had.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's the comic Jackie Mason had this great one-liner where he said, people talk about an acquired taste. Do you know what an acquired taste is? It's something that doesn't taste good. It's like, what no one has to acquire a taste for? Bacon. And that's because bacon tastes good. And I think that that's also true of Bel Air. People
Mm-hmm.
show up, and I've almost never seen anybody not like Bel Air, at least
Mm-hmm.
within 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, it has a very, very broad appeal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the big burly guys working across the street in the warehouse drink Bel Air. You know, their girlfriends drink Bel Air. You know, their friends drink Bel Air. It just tastes good. You know, which is the primary job of beer.
That's what you want.
Taste good is kind of like number one on the list
For sure.
of things that you're supposed to do. It's not supposed to be a challenge. You know, it's not it's not a contest. You're supposed to be having a good time.
Speaking of tasting good, I'm going to use that as my segue onto the next beer because I'm conscious we've got an hour here and this is the main event. So I've got mine here.
All right. Well, some people are wondering, why is Garrett in a T-shirt wherein he reveals the Black Ops T-shirt?
Fantastic.
There are not many of these. So this is what it takes to get me to wear a T-shirt, Miro. Just so you know.
It's funny you say that because I don't think I've seen you without a collar.
No, probably not. But you know what? A man always looks stylish. It turns out, in a Black Ops T-shirt. It's a funny thing. I'm discovering that, and since I'm spending all my time mostly in my house and on my roof, in more comfortable everyday clothes, one learns to wear more T-shirts.
Yeah.
I've got.
Got your bottle here.
Got the two-shot there,
Thank you. Very appreciated.
Yeah. Got my matching going on. It's not like we haven't let down our standards. Let's be fair. How often do we have the match going on?
I appreciate it.
Black Ops is one of the more fun stories in the Brooklyn Brewery pantheon because people often will say to us, wow, what a great name for a beer. You guys are like such clever marketers. The thing that they often don't realize is it was a joke. It was a joke. It was like an in-joke among the brewers. And so I will tell the story. Some of you will have heard it before.
It's a good story,
but,
please.
not necessarily, the whole real story. So back when we first made this beer, it was 2006 into 2007. And we were starting along our journey towards doing some bottle conditioning, and we were starting to bottle some stuff at the brewery and experiment with re-fermentation, which was less well known among brewers and more difficult than we thought that it was going to be. And we're paying close attention to, okay, how is this all going to go? At the same time, there were starting to be some barrel-aged imperial stouts out there.
Yeah.
And some of them were very good. A lot of them, though, tasted weird. They tasted like someone took a really nice imperial stout and put a shot of bourbon in it.
Okay.
So it wasn't necessarily all melded together. It kind of tasted like somebody just put whiskey in the in the beer, and like it was some kind of Boilermaker, and not like it was a well-integrated beer.
Sure.
And so I started to say, I thought this was a really nice type of beer, but I wanted to do it differently. So I went to the team and I said, okay, we're going to get these barrels. And I wanted to order in these barrels from one of my favorite bourbons, which was Woodford Reserve is a favorite. And I was going to order those in.
Yeah.
And we were going to do this. I told the salespeople, and I thought they would be excited. Hey guys, we're going to make about 100 cases, 200 cases of this barrel-aged beer.
Yeah.
Now this is 2006.
Okay.
At the time, people were just getting started with social media, right? I mean, it's not like it is now. I mean, Facebook was well established, I guess, by then. But not there was no Instagram or whatever else. So a lot of things kind of went by whispers and whatever else, or something you saw maybe on Facebook or a phone call. Hey, there's some new beer by so-and-so. Well, the salespeople said, oh, no. Do not bring this beer out. I'm like, what are you talking about? This is going to be great. We're going to have our own style of barrel-aged imperial stout. It'll be bottle conditioned. It'll have a different texture. You know, it's going to be beautiful. You're going to love it. It's like, and they said, that's the problem. And I'm like, what? Like, that's a problem? They're like, yeah, it's not a problem for you. It's a problem for us. You're going to make 200 cases. It's a big country, you know, and then I'm going to have 800 people who want it. And so 200 of my customers are going to be really happy, and 600 are going to be really, really angry, inconsolably angry. And you're going to ruin our relationships and everything else. And you're going to cause nothing but trouble. Just like, don't do it. And so I was not amused.
Yeah. And,
you know, I don't take kindly to the word no.
Sure.
And like Captain Kirk, I don't believe in unwinnable situations. So, what I did was I made the beer anyway.
Okay.
And I didn't tell anybody. So on the schedule,
on
one day, it was just, yes.
Logistically, how? How do you make a beer with no one realizing or knowing?
Well, you bring the team in on a holiday.
Okay.
So that brewery is technically closed.
Okay.
And I actually, this kind of goes back, I learned this, you know, no one's heard this story. I kind of learned this in the original brewing in 1994 of Brooklyn Black Chocolate Stout, which was brewed on July the 4th of 1994. I recently, only a few days ago, and you will see it soon on Instagram, found the original recipe sheets, handwritten. And so I brewed it because the brewery I was working for, which I knew I wanted to leave, Manhattan Brewing Company, was closed. And therefore, the first brew of Black Chocolate Stout did not exist. It only existed when I brought it to Brooklyn Brewery and said, this is what I would do. And they said, like, you need to get over here. So in a certain way, even though they are completely different recipes, Black Chocolate Stout was the original Black Ops.
Okay.
And you will see soon the paper was like July 4th, 1994. So we did the same thing. There were only 5 of us who worked in the brew house at the time, and the warehouse manager clued in because you can't hide anything from the warehouse manager. You know, it's going to be in his warehouse. He's going to know about it.
Yeah.
But we took the beer, put it in barrels, and we hid it under a tarp, you know, in a corner. Some months later, it's about October, and, you know, I'm in a meeting, and somebody says, you know, I'm hearing all these wonderful things about barrel-aged beers. You know, like, we should think about doing one of those. And I just basically said, guess what I did? But we still had the same problem, which was that we didn't know how to sell such a small amount of beer and not upset people.
Sure.
So we came up with this new idea, which was that we were going to make the beer and we're going to drink the beer, but we wouldn't sell the beer. Right? You know, this is why I never actually started my own brewery.
Yeah.
Out of business. My business acumen apparently is not maybe what it needs to be. The idea of a brewery is to make the beer and then sell the beer and get the money.
I have heard that.
Which keeps the brewery running. But the funny thing is that what I did was I gave everybody at the brewery a case of beer around the holidays. So Christmas time, everybody got a case of beer. And it's a funny thing. Nobody asks any questions when they get a case of beautiful barrel-aged beer for Christmas. You know, they don't ask, where did the money come from? Or when did you do this? Or who gave permission for this? They just say, thanks. And they walk away with the cake. So, you know, that's the way that went. And then within a few months, I started to meet people, you know, at parties and whatever else, you know. Hey, Garrett, my name's Tim. How you doing, Tim? It's like, I've had Black Ops. and I would step back. I'm like, who are you? Why are you here? Have you been following me? Like, why, you know, how did you get Black Ops? And they would tell a story about how they knew somebody at the brewery, or somebody at the brewery was a friend of their friend, or whatever else, and somehow they were connected, even if tangentially, to Brooklyn Brewery, and somehow it come across, you know, this bottle. You know, and it became, you know, a fable. And the original label, and we did in the year that we didn't sell it, we did make a label for Black Ops, which was dark gray on black. It
Okay.
was barely, the logo, everything, the writing was barely visible. I would love to have kept that label. Unfortunately, quite illegal when it comes to sale, because a label which is illegible is not a legal label. So we weren't able to keep that. But that's where kind of the idea around it came. And it's a very different beer than the other imperial stouts of its type that you'll see. Much lower in bitterness, even in some ways lower in roast, higher in carbonation. And I am not really aware of other fully bottle conditioned and barrel aged imperial stouts out there. It has a completely different texture to it. It's not heavy. It's not tremendously sweet. And even though it's over 12%, it seems almost light on its feet, in a certain way.
It's very approachable.
Now, yeah, it's very approachable, but it gains depth over time.
Yeah.
And so the thing about Black Ops is that Black Ops is not another beer with a barrel added to it. Black Ops is designed to be in the barrel, and Black Ops, before it goes into the barrel, really tastes somewhat incomplete. It's perfectly fine, but it's not a tremendously distinguished beer unto itself because it has a gap in its flavor profile. And the barrel then fills that space, and the whole thing becomes one flavor together. And so more than the sum of its parts. So, by the way, the one and only Garrett Oliver glass given to me, by Cristal Blumenau of Brazil. Thanks to my good Brazilian friends. And so, this type of mousse, the foam quality, the way everything knits together in Black Ops, I think is really special. Now, for years, we were using the same barrels, and they were very good barrels from Woodford, but we had no actual relationship with them. We did in the very early days, where literally I would just call up and I would talk to the distillery manager, and he would literally, they referred to, it's not a ceremonious word, but it is the way that they referred to it. They dump the barrels because they roll them over a trench. So when you empty your barrels rather than racking, it's called dumping. Doesn't sound too great. They said, well, and they used to say, well, what day do you want to pick up the barrels? And it's like, it'll be great. We pick them up on Wednesday. And they said, oh, we'll dump on Tuesday then. They would literally schedule it. And then as that distillery got bigger, we kind of lost touch with, the people there. And I started to say, this is like a big thing for us. We really would like to have a relationship. And I knew the guys from Four Roses because the main guy there used to be a brewer, known him for 25 years, Ryan Ashley. And we worked with some other projects with Four Roses, the 175th anniversary edition of Carnegie Porter. Later we did that. But I think we had used Four Roses once or twice, maybe bought through a broker or something, but not directly. And so, in the last couple of years, I've been trying to talk to people at Four Roses into going in with us in Black Ops and actually making it a bit co-branded. Because anybody, if you've seen my Instagram today, you'll see that it's about how to make a cocktail. Like I'm a cocktail geek.
Yeah.
And so I have a lot of friends in the cocktail world. I have a well-stocked bar. I know a lot about bourbon and whiskey and et cetera. And I was like, I think that you guys would love working with us, and we respect and love Four Roses. And I've got a small batch right here at my bar. And it took a while. It took a while to talk them into it. They were like, we have a great name worldwide, and we want to make sure that you're going to, live up to it. And so, eventually they said yes. And this past year was the first year that we aged Black Ops in Four Roses barrels. Now, it's not just Four Roses, but Four Roses small batch, which I don't know how much that costs in Australia, but that's a $70 or $80 US bottle, of bourbon. It's not cheap. It's not obvious in its flavors. It's got just layers and layers of depth, which are really beautiful. And the Four Roses small batch is actually made out of 4 separate bourbons that have different combinations of mash bill and yeast strain.
Mm-hmm.
And so those 4 different bourbons then come together and make Four Roses small batch.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to actually replicate the idea of aging in small batch barrels, because small batch barrels technically don't exist, right? There are 4 separate bourbons that are blended to make small batch, which is a blend. We had to then separate the barrels out and use the barrels in the same proportion that they use them in the Four Roses small batch bourbon.
Mm-hmm.
Believe me, they consider this to be a big pain. You know,
I imagine.
Because at the distillery, if you know about bourbon, American straight bourbon has to be made as have a certain kind of mash bill, this much corn, et cetera. And you can only use a bourbon barrel once to make American straight bourbon. So after that, you can use it for other whiskeys, you can do whatever you want with it. But most of those barrels really became a waste product. They were made into, barbecue wood or like whatever else, furniture. People didn't really have a use for them. These days with the resurgence of whiskeys worldwide, there's a lot of demand for barrels. And a lot of that demand actually, believe it or not, comes out of China and India, which are the biggest makers in the world of whiskey. And those whiskeys are generally really, really horrible. And believe me, the Chinese and Indians know this. And they said, how are we going to make really great whiskeys? They need good barrels. Where are the barrels? They're in Kentucky. There are barrels. So, we're actually competing with big buyers from other countries, never mind other brewers who are looking to buy barrels. So our relationship, with the Four Roses guys is very special to us. We love this bourbon. We then age it, of course, separately in the different barrels. And then we put Black Ops together now out of 4 different barrel expressions. So one actual beer, but aged in 4 barrels. And what's interesting is that you can actually taste the difference between the different barrels.
Sure.
Even though the only difference between the barrels themselves is the bourbon that was in the barrels.
Okay.
So we weren't expecting that, but it's true.
And do you blend them evenly of all 4, or do you kind of play around with the blend since they are quite different, or?
We did not play with the blend to make it different than their original blend. So we're looking to replicate the original blend.
Sure,
however, we did bottle certain of the expressions separately, which if I was in Australia right now doing this with you, I would have ghost bottles of different cuts.
I want to taste those.
So you'd have, and we already did an event like this. We did we did one in New York where we tasted the 4 different separate bourbons, and then the blended small batch, and then we tasted the 4 separate Black Opses.
Oh, that sounds so good.
And the final compilation. So on the table there were 10 drinks.
Amazing.
To express, the entire way the whole thing came together. It's just absolutely fascinating stuff that we're looking forward to really playing with more in the future. Under this great partnership. And Black Ops itself, as much as we loved it before, it has about 3 or 4 extra layers to it than it ever had before.
Okay. Sure.
Partly because the flavors are just a bit less straightforward and obvious and more kind of ethereal. That you don't have the huge vanilla punch that you do in some of them. It's more understated, but then you have all these kind of lactones and coconut types of things and whatever else going on in interspersed waves. And at 12.3%, it really doesn't go down like 12.3. It's a dangerously smooth drink, I'd say.
It sure is.
Well, and that's actually kind of what I'd like to get to, or at least the crux of, Garrett. This is the smoothest, to my palate, the smoothest vintage I've had of this beer. But But can I just get? There's actually a great question online from Joel at the Dutch Trading Co. And he's wondering how long was the beer in barrel? Those 4 barrels or 4 kinds of barrel expressions you're talking about. How long was the beer in there? How long is this? How old is this liquid we're drinking right now?
So the beer was in the barrel for a year. It would have come out, of the barrel basically last year about this time. And so it went in, which was 20. So the beer was brewed in 2018. Would have looped around the year until 2019, bottled in 2019, released in October, November of 2019. And now we're halfway around the year. Again, 3/4 of the way around the year into 2020. So, the beer is about 3 years old now.
Okay. And how long would you think would be ideal to age this beer?
2019, yeah.
How long would you think would be ideal to age this beer? Like, do you think it's drinking best now, or do you think in a couple of years?
I would say that this year's Black Ops was much, much better, much, much earlier than any of the previous batches.
Sure.
In its first weeks, after release, we're like, at least let it sit for a month. It's like it's not quite settled yet. This one was immediately, we loved it from day one.
Yeah, great.
We had no worries about it. We were like, wow, this is great. I can't wait to see where it goes because it starts off as good as any of the other ones were after, say, 2 years.
Sure.
So it's kind of starting off at a much higher position. And then we'll see as everything starts to meld further together, and more, and you start over time getting more, oxidative sherry notes and things like that. You get even more layers of complexity. We'll get the chance to see where it goes. But I think that this will end up being, the most complex Black Ops we've ever made. And I think that it compares now, a year in the bottle, very favorably to the best of other batches that might have been in the bottle for 4 or 5 years already.
Yeah, sure.
I think it has great aging potential. It is a beer that's designed to be drinkable when it's young, but also to have a long, aging period. So I wouldn't say that Black Ops is designed to be brilliant, say, in 20 years.
Okay.
I say that it has a really good 10 years.
Sure.
And then we'll see how it does past then. I will say that 2007 tastes great. It really does. And so that gives me, good hopes, given that was 13 years ago, that this will last at least as long and really be nice.
Yeah, great. Let's talk about food pairings.
Well, it's a funny thing. Food pairings are not always where you think they're going to be. There are obvious ones. If I say to you vanilla ice cream, and then you drink your Black Ops and you imagine some vanilla ice cream, you will mentally be able to see how ridiculously nice that's going to be.
Yes.
Not that hard.
Yeah.
One of the great things about Black Ops with desserts is that it's not that sweet. Now, in the wine world, they often say that the wine needs to be at least as sweet as the dessert.
Yes.
Which means that when you're doing dessert wine with dessert, it's sweet and sweet and sweet and sweet and sweet and sweet and sweet. And it's actually, I find that to be a kind of
cloying.
Overload. Yeah, it's cloying. There's just too much.
Yeah.
I mean, you remember being a kid and eating an ice cream cone, and then you'd have that glass of water or glass of milk. And that was the best glass of water and best glass of milk you ever had. Partly because a buildup of so much sugar on your palate is almost like a form of pain, like it's too much for you.
Yeah.
Which is one reason why we love coffee with desserts. Because you just, drink the coffee's not that sweet. It kind of lets the dessert come back over and over again fresh.
Yeah.
Black Ops that works that way also with desserts. But similarly, because it's not that sweet, you can pair it, with savory dishes. So this evening, again, if you follow me on Instagram, you'll see there's an Instagram story up where I made, Mexican mole sauce, which contains fruit, chili, chocolate.
Yeah.
Black Ops is great with mole
Ooh, I
sauce.
can
It's
imagine.
great with beef, or venison, which is often made, venison's often made with a coffee-based sauce. Then you can do stuff over there. But my favorite Black Ops pairing really is Stilton cheese.
Okay.
Yeah. You never would figure, but there's this whole chocolatey underpinning to Stilton, which I did not realize was there until I tasted Stilton with first black chocolate stout and then later with Black Ops. And the whole thing just kind of explodes.
Yeah.
Sweetness versus salt versus funk and just all, the cheese, which is spectacular, even gets even better. And the beer just goes through the roof. It's crazy beautiful.
Sounds very good. I imagine we're getting a couple of questions coming through, Miro.
It's lighting up in the discussion of barrels. I think maybe that shouldn't be so surprising considering the complexity of culture and how that sort of gets people interested in this day and age. Garrett, I might read this one out. Is there much experimentation with different barrel origins? The world of wine has pretty solid understanding of how different types of wood of different age affect wine. Is this the same in beer? I'd really like to hear your answer on that.
Well, it's certainly within the overall world of beer, and this sets aside the world of bourbon where, again, it's prescribed by law. You have to use charred American oak, and then every distillery has their way that they will age their oak, char their oak, and this will be part of, and where they source it, but I mean, it's going to be American white oak. In the case of other beers, absolutely. Other types of wood. Some of my favorite woods are things that we don't even hear of much in the United States, like Amburana, which is a South American hardwood, which is often used to make barrels to age the Brazilian cachaça. Beautifully flavored wood. I've had stuff in Cyprus, in all sorts of barrels. I've seen cedar barrels, all kinds of things. So when you look at a barrel, there are really 4 different things that you could want from a barrel, basically. The barrel starts off just as a container. I mean, it was what you put everything in, from water to olive oil to soy sauce in the old days. And people weren't thinking that much about flavoring. In fact, they were often trying to avoid flavoring and would line the inside of the barrel with pitch, in order to avoid both leakage and flavor. Now, in the modern world, we have the 4 elements, which are micro-oxygenation, which, unless you line it with something, you can't stop. The wood is porous. Oxygen slowly comes in through the wood, the pores of the wood, and you have an evolution of the flavor of the beer through the slow introduction of oxygen. A second thing, which you may or may not want, microflora. You can't sterilize the wood. So if you are, say, you made a great funky saison or mixed fermentation beer, and this barrel has a great culture in it, you can put your next beer in there and take on the same culture because it's living in the wood. So harboring of microorganisms. The third thing is the flavor of the wood itself. What does the wood taste like? How has it been treated? Where was it grown? What type of wood is it? Oak is not the only wood, like I was saying. You can use all types. So what does the wood itself taste like? When you taste bourbon, yes, you taste the recipe, but you're also, a big part of the flavor of bourbon is the oak. And so you're going to want to taste that. And then finally, there's the previous tenant of the wood. What was in the wood before? So we have aged beers the strongest expressions have been things like mezcal, which come through tremendously powerfully. There are other things that don't come through as strongly. And it's a learning process as to which of these qualities, these 4 qualities, are you going to get? Which ones do you want? Maybe you don't want, we don't want microorganisms doing funky things really in Black Ops. Not that it couldn't be good, we're just trying to go in a particular direction. And so, we're not looking for, if we want to do it with Brett or something, we do a different expression. And so there have been cases where we have on the side, and you'll see this in ghost bottles, done other agings of Black Ops.
Okay.
So we won the gold medal, for American Cask at the Great British Beer Festival a year and a half ago, or 2 years ago, with Black Ops aged in orange Curacao barrels from a small producer in Kentucky called Copper and Kings.
Sounds so good.
Absolutely, yeah. It was like, it's kind of obvious, like kind of chocolate and coffee and like this big punch of orange. Absolutely, beautiful beer.
Honestly, I have to say, you're telling me about so many things that I want to try. And I can't because they're there with you.
That is why we have ghost bottles, because, and you can think of Black Ops as being the original ghost bottle, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the whole idea of ghost bottles really comes out of Black Ops, because we didn't want to stop creating things. We didn't want the creation of stuff to be limited by what could be released, through general release. And many things have gone from being ghost bottles into beers that were made for production. So, that's kind of, it's part of our...
There's hope.
Our hope.
Might get to try it yet. Something really interesting you said the other day when we spoke to was, these are all hand bottled, aren't they?
Yes. That didn't used to be the case. We used to bottle Black Ops on our bottling line. And then, our lab started getting more and more sophisticated. And we would look at Black Ops and we'd say, oh, it's completely clean. There's nothing going on in there. There are no other microflora. And then the closer we looked, we're like, well, there's no microflora in there. The wood can't be sterilized. And despite the fact that it spent 7 or 8 years with whiskey, and, you're talking about cask strength whiskey, so you're talking about 65% or so alcohol.
Okay.
You would think that things wouldn't live, but life finds a way. So, there's still stuff going on in there. Now, not one bottle of Black Ops is ever spoiled. And we did not only did we not want that to happen, we also didn't want whatever these microflora were all up inside of our bottling line where they could later express themselves, in an IPA or something else. This has happened to a number of breweries. And, we take those things seriously. So we decided that we were not going to put that beer through the bottling line anymore, and that we would run all the bottles by hand. So that's been going on for about six years now, at least 7 years, probably longer than that, maybe 8 years. So every single bottle you have of Black Ops was bottled entirely by hand. I'm talking about somebody putting their hands on it and putting it up to a spout. And then we put it up back on the line, on the bottling line, just for the portion that drives the cork and puts the wire cage on. At that point, it's flat. It goes across the street to undergo its re-fermentation in the bottle. We've added, in tank, the new yeast together with the priming sugar. It goes into the warm rooms at 25 degrees Celsius. Undergoes a secondary fermentation in the bottle, which is where it gets all of its carbonation, and then comes out several weeks later.
Fantastic.
So, when, it's kind of funny. I kind of feel like sometimes we are, over time, we're a brewery that's been going backwards in time. Stuff that, as we've gotten bigger, we've actually become more and more and more craft.
I like that.
Well, I like it too. It's like we didn't used to bottle stuff by hand. We weren't doing all those barrel aging things. At one point we had more than 2,000 oak barrels, in our barrels. And so, there is in a lot of these specialty beers a huge amount of handwork. And the automation that we do have in the brewery is actually, ironically, freed us up. It's not ironically, it was on purpose, freed us up to do more stuff like that, to do more handwork.
No, that's fantastic. I'm sure it's much more of a sophisticated way that I've ever done it, but I've made a little bit of wine at home and we've had to hand bottle everything, obviously, that we've made. And my first year, I did 1 year of viticulture. I was living alone at the time and I had, I think, 20 or 30 litres of wine to bottle alone. and I was up at 3 a.m. bottling wine all over the floor. Anytime someone says that it's been hand bottled, I have some respect there, but I'm sure it's much neater than mine was at the time.
Well, it has to be. Like, you watch people in wineries and they'll they'll drink a glass of something and put it back in the barrel.
Yeah.
You see that? You see that, and you're like, oh no.
What are you doing?
But the whole foot stomping thing. I saw a picture of a friend of mine, and he was in a vat, and he was up to his chest.
Yeah.
And he's foot stomping. It was up to his chest, and I'm sitting there, and it's like, that's not just your feet. Like,
it's part of the culture
all the
now.
wine, the grapes, everything else, everything under here is in the wine.
It's so different.
Really?
It's so different. Yeah, I've been in
really
a couple of breweries and picked up the hops, and they've said to me, "We can't use those now. You've touched them." Like, it's so different, the way of thinking.
Well, it's different in beer now than it used to be. Because until 20 years ago, hops were thought of, except in England or some smaller breweries in the United States. But 25 years ago, dry hopping, people didn't even know what dry hopping was. There were a few breweries doing it, but not really. It wasn't a big deal. An IPA wasn't a big deal.
Yeah.
And so hops were something which they were always boiled, right?
Yeah.
And when you boil something, you sterilize it, you make it food grade, essentially. It is only really in the modern era where dry hopping has become this huge thing, where we are now paying attention to hops as an agricultural product that goes direct to the consumer. That was not the way hops were literally even 15, 20 years ago, because nobody ever tasted hops straight. They always went not only through the boiling, but they went through a fermentation process.
Yeah.
And so now you're drinking, if those hops are on the floor, they go from the floor into the tank, into your glass, essentially unchanged.
Yeah.
And that changes everything.
For sure.
So, we have a group in the United States called Hop Quality Group that actually is the kind of, in partnership with the hop growers, keep an eye on all the sanitation practices and everything else. This was something that used to be done by the big brewers.
Okay.
The big three brewers, they all had specialists who would go to the farms and inspect them and make sure they were sanitary and everything else. And over the years, as they've cut costs, the big brewers have gotten rid of all those people. And so there was nobody looking at the hop farms.
Okay.
And so all it takes, you don't have to use too much imagination if you've ever been on a farm. A couple of pigeons get inside, your hop warehouse and go flying around, and the hops are out on a big floor. You're going to end up with an unsanitary situation.
For sure.
And so now it is actually the craft brewers who are looking after the entire hop industry, when it comes to that, because we're the ones, who are, really championing and pioneering the use of hops as a direct agricultural product.
Yeah, for sure. I'm just a little bit conscious. We're hitting an hour, but I'm sure there's a couple of questions. Do you have time, Garrett, for a few questions?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. I will keep it super finite, and I've picked two key questions, and I think that Garrett could give a little bit of insight.
The two key.
I hope they're good.
The two key questions.
Okay, so I think one will be shorter, one might be a bit more involved. The shorter one is the shorter one is there's a room of people in Western Australia and Australia over near Perth in a bar called Dutch Trading Co. They're not under big hi Joel, hi Dutch Trading Co. They're not under the same restrictions as a lot of the rest of the country, and in honor of this event they're opening Monster barley wine.
Wow.
For the room. So you've been talking about aging. I learned once by reading a book that beer travels through space in three ways. Through space and time in three ways. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what you might expect from, I think, an 8-year-old beer, whether it be black hops or your barley wine. That's the first question. And then I'll come back to you in I know a minute or two from now, and we'll give you the second closing question.
Well, I mean, there's a lot to unpack in a way in that question, and I'll try to make it shorter. There have been over time at least 4 distinct styles of barley wine. There's the original style, which was exemplified by beers like Thomas Hardy's, J.W. Lee's Harvest Ale, which is still made. The old school 1800s British barley wine. Then you had modern barley wine. A type of modern barley wine, which would be exemplified by, what was it called? Golden Pride by Fuller's. This would be a golden beer of about 8% that was drunk relatively fresh. Then you have the American style of barley wine, which added this big hop character to it, and was, invented by breweries like Sierra Nevada, and you had Anchor Old Foghorn, stuff like that, coming back in the day. And then you have an intermediate type, which is pretty much where Monster falls, where it has aging potential, but not the kind of aging potential of like the Thomas Hardy's that'll go 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
Golden Pride has almost no aging potential. A couple of years, Golden Pride, that kind of golden barley wine style would be shot. That's it. It's done. We wanted something that would age nicely for maybe 5-6 years. But I have to admit, at the time that we brought out Monster, it was the 90s. Like, we weren't really even thinking about beer aging as much. But as you get deeper into everything, you start to watch beers take on their own life. And it wasn't a life that you had necessarily in mind for them. By the time that we wrapped up production of Monster, which would have been 2012, we were thinking more than we had in the past about, the beer's ability to age. So it became a little bit bigger, a little bit sweeter, but we wanted it, we wanted that beer to be drinkable when it was released. Because old school barley wine, you couldn't really drink barley wine for like 4 or 5 years after it was brewed. It was like grape Barolo. It's like so tight, and big. It needed time to like relax into itself. Monster was designed to be good immediately, and there is a price for that, which is, you don't have the long aging capabilities. But I would expect in Monster from 2012 to see some distinct sherryish character from oxidation, but to have like good fruit in the center, still retaining bitterness, obviously some browning, kind of like baked apples kind of notes going on, but generally kind of lighter than you would expect on its feet at 10%, and still very pleasant, very pleasant beer to drink. And I think that it's important when you drink older beers, like drinking older wines, you shouldn't expect and don't want them to taste like young beers.
Mm-hmm.
They should taste like older beers, and that's kind of the pleasure of drinking them.
Fantastic. Okay, so we're on to the last question I've got from the group. A couple of people have asked this, Garrett. So from Healy P and James Smith in Alphington, our journalist in amongst the cat amongst the pigeons here, they're both asking this question about your creative process, your method behind like R&D and finalizing new beer concepts and like the inspiration within that.
Well, there are some things about designing beers that, come out of I think the thing that I have that I wouldn't say that brewers necessarily that I know more, about flavors than a lot of people, et cetera. One thing I think a lot of good brewers have in common is a great memory for flavor.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember single dishes that I had 30 years ago as if I had them yesterday. And they present themselves like a picture. I can see them, I can smell them, I can taste them now. And that ability to do that means that so many things that I've ever tasted are present in front of me in my mind. And I think that in a way, combining flavors is almost like writing music. You know, you don't sit down necessarily and you ask somebody, well, how did you write this symphony? It's this creative process where all these different streams of things are coming together in your head, and your mind is just working it through, you know, into a finished thing. So often I have the idea of the beer in my mind first, and then look to see, okay, what is the technique that I want to use that fits the Brooklyn way of doing things that will create this beer? And that is one of the things that makes beer, you know, a very distinctly culinary thing, which is the opposite of wine. People think of, you know, it's like, oh, you're kind of, you know, nearest analog of you like our winemakers. No, like our nearest analogs are chefs. Because what we're doing has a recipe. We are not usually expressing a piece of land or expressing a single ingredient like a grape, or trying to give something a sense of place. The terroir of the brewer, not that hops and malt don't have terroir, but you know, the terroir of the brewer is often in the mind, unless you're doing spontaneous fermentation. And so you're creating the idea first and then trying to hit the idea, which is the opposite of the way wine is traditionally made, which is that you make the wine and then it becomes itself. You're trying to express something that was already there. And in that, you know, beer is creative in of itself, because if you don't have an idea of where you're going, it's hard to call that, you know, a necessarily creative thing. Now, there are situations where we create things. I don't know if you ever had a chance, I know you did, Miro, to taste Serpent, you know, the beer we made with Thornbridge Brewery, and Tom Oliver's cider, where we took the wild sediments from natural fermentations of cider, added them to barrels to drive this particular beer in a completely natural direction. I had an idea where that was going to go based on experience, but it's not controllable, right? You know, I'm not kind of setting a path out that says you can only go here. I'm trying to get this beer to taste exactly like this. That was more a matter of serendipity. This is kind of sort of what I expect to happen, and that it's going to be nice, but exactly how it's going to go down, like, I don't know. And that's a very different thing. But usually the creative process is quite deliberate. There are some parts of it that are structural, you know, that are, if you look at cocktails, really, there are 5 or 6 types of cocktails. So sours are based on an acidic juice, almost always lime or lemon. And then you add sugar and booze, right? And then there are flavorings. And then all these fractals come off of that one idea of a base. And you have that within pale ales, you have that within sours, etc. What is the backbone? And then what's going to be built onto it? And so, you know, the same way that French, you know, the French will have mother sauces, or you hear chefs talk about what's the protein. I hate that word, protein, as if the protein were fungible. But in a way, to the chef, it is. Is it a brown piece of chicken or a brown piece of pork, or is it going to be what's in the middle, and then what are we building, you know, around it? So there is certainly a structure to the process, but part of it is also like, what do we want this thing to do? We look at Bel Air. What is it? What is the purpose of Bel Air? What's its job? What do we want it to do that our other beers don't do? You know, what food do we want to go with that we don't have a beer that goes with that yet? What situations could people be in where they're going to want this beer instead of the beers that we already make? Because I want each of our beers to have their own personality. If this beer, new beer, is kind of like one of our other beers, then like, why did we make it? Like, why don't we just drink the other beer, you know?
Yeah.
I feel the same way if I'm going to buy like an expensive shirt. You know, I'll look at it and it's like, that's a really nice shirt. And I'll think about, when am I going to wear that shirt rather than these 3 shirts that I already have? If the answer is that I'll always like the other 3 shirts better than this one, I don't buy the shirt. You know, if I can see a situation where this is going to be the one for this particular occasion, that's where I go buy something. And I feel the same way about beer. What Bel Air does is completely different than what even some of our other sour beers that were more complex, etc. do. It's an everyday drinker, as a sour, which is a beautiful thing to have, and we didn't have one before. And so it fills its own niche. And I think the same is true of basically all of our beers. They have their own personalities.
So important. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Might have to wrap it up. Unfortunately, I'd love to hear a lot more. Thank you so much, both of you, for putting this together. I know that Miro put in a lot of work to make this happen. And thanks so much, Garrett, for coming and having a chat to us.
Well, thanks really to Australia for your support. We really appreciate it. I look forward to getting back down there someday. I have to say, I never thought I would be feeling nostalgic, and really would love to get on an 18-hour flight. But right now, it actually sounds pretty good. But great talking to you guys. I hope we'll be able to see you in New York soon. Everybody stay safe and be well. And summertime's coming your way. We're letting the warm weather go, and we're sending it down to you. So.
Perfect. And I think I have a couple of bottles left in the stores if anyone's keen to get some. But in saying that might not be true. They went pretty quickly, but I believe there's a couple of bottles left. So, yeah.
All right.
Excellent.
Well, thanks, guys.
Great to chat with you. See you guys later.
You too. Ciao, Australia.